Hello, students! Today we will be discussing some of the many historical figures, specifically the most influential African Americans. These people paved the way for African Americans in society, as we know that at one point the black community did not have many of the luxuries that there are today. These people supported the abolishment of slavery, then fought against segregation until the people got their right. Let me introduce you to an individual who revolutionized sports and evolved into a universal icon.
I, Muhammad Ali, was not only an American professional boxer, but also a former heavyweight champion boxer. I became an Olympic gold medalist in the 1960 Olympics, and at only the age of 22, I became the world heavyweight boxing champion. Not only that, but I became the first boxer to win the heavyweight title 3 times. Over the span of my dominant 21 career of professional boxing, I emerged as a successful boxer and accumulated 56 wins out of 61 fights in total. Especially noteworthy wins against Joe Frazier and George Freeman, who were reigning dominant fighters during this time period. I refused to conform to public expectations, especially of a black male, during this time in which the U.S. was experiencing racial, political, and social unrest. Furthermore, I emerged as a greatly influential individual for many people, especially for individuals who perceive the sport of boxing as deplorable. Moreover, I am generally renowned as the most celebrated athlete in the sport of boxing. I voice my opinions and viewpoints on political, racial, and social issues such as the Vietnam War, civil rights, and religion, to name a few.
Overall, Muhammad Ali was significant in changing the course of U.S. history and ultimately cemented his legacy through his actions inside and outside the ring. To many individuals, Ali was the epitome of tenacity and courageousness, especially in the face of disease, all while advocating peace and issues regarding children.
Who in here likes sports?
Me!
Well, let's introduce Jackie Robinson.
I was born into a society with many prejudices, which is why my entrance into the Major Baseball League was so significant. In 1947, I became the first African American in the league. I began as first base on the Brooklyn Dodgers, and this broke the color barrier in society. Although I faced many challenges being accepted by my fellow teammates, I eventually gained a name for myself through my accomplishments. I was named the National League Rookie of the Year in 1947 and the MVP in 1949. In a 10-year span, I was able to lead my team, the Dodgers, to 6 World Series championships.
Jackie Robinson opened the door for African Americans in sports and was able to shine while doing so.
Next, I would like to introduce Thurgood Marshall, who is the first African American in the Supreme Court. Welcome, Mr. Marshall.
Being in the courtroom, I was a crucial advocate for paving the way for many of the African American liberties. I argued 32 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, which is more than anyone else in history. I also served as legal counsel for the NAACP and was named the first director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in 1940. I began my career as a lawyer and was recognized for many of the cases I fought. I was appointed to the Court of Appeals by John F. Kennedy in 1965 and then appointed to the Supreme Court by Lyndon B. Johnson in 1967. My most notable case that I served on before I was appointed to the Supreme Court was Brown v. Board of Education, in which I struck down the separate but equal claim made in Plessy v. Ferguson. My most memorable case while serving on the Supreme Court was Roe v. Wade, where I secured the rights to abortion for all women.
Thurgood Marshall is most known for his contribution to the Brown versus Board of Education case, where he was able to nullify the separate but equal claim. Mr. Marshall may be new to you all, but his contributions were essential for the progress within the African American community. Here is Malcolm X. He was formerly referred to as Malcolm Little, but felt that the last name Little was one that was given by a slave master, so he changed his last name to X to signify the lost name given to him by his ancestors.
The terrorism I experienced from the white supremacist group Black Legion shaped my views on human rights from when I was a young kid. Due to some unfortunate events, my family was split up and bad habits that I picked up gained me a 10-year prison sentence. I served 7 years and was paroled and joined the Nation of Islam, where my passion and conviction when speaking on black nationalist ideals gained me popularity that surpassed that of the Nation of Islam leader, Elijah Muhammad. Discrepancies between Muhammad and I would eventually lead to me leaving the Nation of Islam. I supported using violence as a tactic for achieving equality and was remembered for my quote, "by any means necessary." These violent methods influenced the Black Panther Party/movement. I went on a pilgrimage to Mecca, and upon my return I changed my views and started using peaceful ways to fight for equality.
Shortly after this, Malcolm X was assassinated, shot 15 times by 3 members of the Nation of Islam. He died a civil and human rights hero as he displayed his relentless persistence to improve the lives of African Americans.
Now I present to you Booker T. Washington, a historical figure that aided in the education of African Americans.
My name is Booker T. Washington, and I was one of the most influential African American educators in the 19th century. I founded the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama that was devoted to training African Americans in agriculture and crafts. We were devoted to training people in these areas because these skills would allow them to be useful in society. In 1895, I delivered my Atlanta Compromise speech to a predominantly white crowd in Atlanta, and it was one of the most important and influential speeches in American history. I also eased many whites' fears and blacks' desires for social integration by stating that both races could be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand, in all things essential to mutual progress.
Booker T. Washington motivated African Americans to thrive and overcome their struggles.
Next here, we have a figure that truly helped begin the rise of African Americans in their fight for freedom.
My name is Nat Turner, and I was an American slave. Growing up, I was sold 3 different times, and I finally ended up at one final plantation in the 1820s, where I began to form my preaching and leadership skills and qualities, and also formed the belief that I was chosen by God to guide people to a better future. I am a significant historical figure because I led the only successful slave revolt in United States history. My revolt consisted of 75 other slaves, and we successfully killed 51 white people and spread terror throughout the white South.
Nat Turner's struggles helped inspire many slaves stand up for what they believed was right.
Today we have one of the very influential African American women here. Known for her acts towards racial equality, we have Rosa Parks.
I, Rosa Parks, fought with my husband, Raymond Parks, as an activist in the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP. I was the first woman out of Montgomery to join the board and was fortunate enough to hold office as secretary for many years. I am most well known for the Montgomery bus boycott, which sparked the attention of many. On December 1st, 1955, I was riding the bus home from work and was asked to surrender my seat for a white passenger. When I refused to move, I was arrested, and this resulted in a 381-day boycott. People participated in many ways, but excluded violence. Eventually, in 1956, it led to the desegregation of public facilities.
Mrs. Parks began the Parks Institute for Self-Development in honor of her husband, and her goal is to help encourage youth to stand up and rise to their fullest potential. She received over 43 honorary doctorate degrees. In 1994, the NAACP established the Rosa Parks Peace Prize. Rosa Parks was evidently a very influential African American woman from the 20th century.
Next, we have Harriet Tubman, a strong, monumental woman, an escaped slave who was willing to put her own life at risk and jeopardize her freedom to assist hundreds of other slaves in the South with seeking refuge in the North through the Underground Railroad.
I, Harriet Tubman, born Araminta Ross in Maryland in 1820, am renowned as one of the most famous conductors of the Underground Railroad. In fact, over 300 slaves in the South were successfully guided by me to freedom in the North over a stretch of 10 years without losing a single one during the journey. During this time period, I was very significant and was in fact viewed as a symbol of hope, liberation, and black resistance to slavery. I also contributed to the Civil War effort by serving the needs of the Union Army and operating as a spy. A few of my duties included cooking food for the army and tending soldiers.
Following Tubman's courageous acts and magnificent leadership, she was renowned as Moses, which alludes to the great legacy of the prophet Moses from the Bible, who led his people from slavery. This famed heroine was willing to put her own life at risk and jeopardize her freedom to assist hundreds of other slaves in the South with seeking refuge in the North through the Underground Railroad. Here we have Frederick Douglass, who was born into slavery and started his abolitionist career at the age of 20 when he escaped slavery. In the years that Douglass was enslaved, although he did face a lot of adversity, many of the owners of the plantations he was on allowed, sometimes even encouraged, the education of slavery.
I took this groundwork and continued to build on my education through reading. I later went on to write 3 slave narrative autobiographies and a variety of abolitionist newspapers, the most famous of them being the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, and the North Star. I had picked up very good oratory skills that allowed me to influence many through my emphatic speeches on achieving freedom. My fame grew throughout America and opened up political opportunities for me that enabled me to talk to the president about recruiting black troops and emancipation during the Civil War, and with President Jackson about black suffrage. I also fought for women's rights, as I was the only African American at the Seneca Falls Convention.
Frederick Douglass is most memorable for the slave narratives that he wrote. In these autobiographies, he was able to unveil the horrors of slavery and change American literature while doing so. Efforts that Douglass made got America closer and closer to giving African American freedom until the subsequent passing of the Emancipation Proclamation and the 15th Amendment. And finally, as I'm sure you have all heard of him, there's Martin Luther King Jr.
Hello, my name is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I was a well-known and respected nonviolent civil rights leader. I started and led a series of campaigns and marches in efforts to persuade people of the United States to come together rather than separate. One of the many peaceful protests took place in Montgomery, Alabama, a highly segregated city, and I began a boycott on a city bus that wouldn't allow blacks to sit at the front. And after 381 days and millions of people joining in, the U.S. Supreme Court outlawed segregated public transportation. I am also very well known for my I Have a Dream speech that I gave to the public during the March on Washington in 1963. In my speech, I called for civil and economic rights and an end to racism.
Overall, his impact on the American society was significant because of his peaceful protest and motivation to make a permanent change. Mr. King is probably one of the most well-known figures in African American history. Because of these strong leaders and their actions in society, we can say that African Americans are seen as equal and have human rights just as everyone else. Let's thank all of our visitors, class.